They thought humans were just another primitive species to be conquered. They were wrong. For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council had ruled over 2 million worlds with absolute authority. Their fleets could glass entire star systems. Their technology could reshape matter at the atomic level. Their psychic warriors could crush minds across light years of space. Then they met Earth. Not the Earth they expected, a blue marble with barely space-faring apes. No, they encountered something that shouldn't exist according to every law of physics they understood. Humans who didn't just survive their most devastating weapons, but walked through them unharmed. Ships that appeared from nowhere, immune to sensors that could detect a grain of sand from a galaxy away. A species that looked at the Council's greatest achievements and simply said, "That's cute." Now, as the last Council fleet burns in Earth's solar system and their most sacred homeworld lies in ruins, the question isn't how humanity became untouchable. The question is, will they show mercy to those who showed them none? Welcome to the story of how the galaxy's greatest empire learned to beg. High Admiral Zex then stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Eternal Dominion, watching the blue world grow larger on the tactical display. Earth, they called it. Such a simple name for what should have been another simple conquest. The planet looked peaceful from this distance, white clouds swirling over brown continents and blue oceans. No orbital defense platforms. No fleet formations. No apparent military infrastructure at all. Admiral, his tactical officer, a four-armed Kelrani, chittered nervously. The advanced scouts have still not reported back. That was 6 hours ago. Zexthan's crimson scales rippled with mild annoyance. His species, the Drakari, had not built the galaxy's most feared empire by worrying about lost scouts. Probably equipment failure. These primitive systems often interfere with our communications. The bridge crew exchanged glances. The Eternal Dominion carried enough firepower to reduce a moon to asteroids, and its sensors could detect a single organism from 3 star systems away. Equipment failure seemed unlikely. "Sir," the communications officer spoke up, "we're receiving a transmission from the planet's surface. It's unusual. Put it through." The main screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at a human male sitting behind what appeared to be a wooden desk. He had gray hair, kind eyes behind metal-framed glasses, and wore simple dark clothing. Behind him, through a window, they could see a cityscape that looked remarkably peaceful for a world about to be conquered. "Greetings," the human said in perfect galactic standard, though none of them remembered sharing their language with this species. "I'm Secretary General Williams of the United Earth Government. I understand you've come quite a long way to visit us." Zexthan stepped forward, his 8-foot frame imposing even through a hologram. "I am High Admiral Zexthan of the Galactic Council. You will surrender immediately and prepare for immediate processing. Your species has been selected for integration into Council space. Resistance will be met with complete annihilation." The human smiled. It wasn't a threatening expression, but something about it made Zexthan's combat instincts twitch. "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Admiral. You see, we've been watching your empire for some time now. We know what integration means. We know about the slave camps on Vrex Prime. We know about the genocide on Althera. We know about the children you use for your psychic experiments." The bridge fell silent. That information was classified at the highest levels. How could these primitives possibly know? "Impossible," Zexthan snarled. "Our intelligence networks are compromised," Williams finished gently. "Admiral, do you know what makes humans different from the other species you've conquered? Your ignorance? Your weakness." Zexthan's claws extended unconsciously. Williams leaned back in his chair. "We don't give up. Every species you've defeated so far has had limits. They reached a point where the cost became too high, where they said enough and surrendered. Humans don't have that setting. Enough of this." Zex then turned to his weapons officer. "Charge the plasma bombardment array. We'll glass their largest cities and see how defiant they remain." "Sir, weapons are already charged and targeted," the weapons officer reported. "Awaiting your command. Fire." The bridge crew watched the tactical display, as the ship's primary weapons discharged. Streams of superheated plasma, each containing enough energy to vaporize a mountain, streaked toward the planet's surface. The targeting system showed direct hits on 12 major population centers. They waited for the confirmation of devastation that always followed. Instead, the display showed something impossible. "Sir," the sensor's officer's voice was barely a whisper. "The plasma streams, they just stopped." "What do you mean stop?" "They hit some kind of barrier approximately 50 kilometers above the planet's surface and dissipated. No damage to the surface. Nora the Eschen readings." It's as if the energy was simply absorbed. On the main screen, Secretary General Williams was still sitting calmly at his desk. "Are you finished with your demonstration, Admiral?" Zexton felt his heart's racing. What is that barrier?" "Oh, that's just Sarah," Williams said casually. "She's one of our defensive specialists. Bit of an overachiever, actually. She usually handles things like asteroid impacts and solar flares, but she was happy to take care of your weapons fire as well." "One person?" "One person stopped our entire bombardment." "Well, she had help from the city's shields, of course. But, yes, Sarah's quite capable. She's been doing this sort of thing since she was 12. Williams paused, seeming to consider something. "Admiral, may I ask you a question?" Zexton was too stunned to object. "How many of your worlds have ever been attacked?" "What kind of question is that?" "Council worlds are untouchable. Our defenses, no, I mean actually attacked. How many times has an enemy fleet appeared in your skies, threatening your families, your children?" Zexton's voice was uncertain. "The Council has not been successfully challenged in 3 millennia. Williams nodded. "That's what we thought. See, Admiral, you've spent so long being the aggressor that you've forgotten what it's like to have your back against the wall. You've forgotten what people become when they have nothing left to lose. We have the most advanced military in the galaxy," Zexton protested, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "You have very good equipment," Williams agreed. "But equipment isn't everything. Tell me, how long did it take your scouts to reach Earth from your nearest base?" 15 standard cycles. "And how long do you think it would take us to reach your homeworld?" Zexton was about to scoff when his navigation officer spoke up, her voice tight with fear. "Sir, we're detecting massive gravitational anomalies throughout the system. Something is displacing space-time on a scale I've never seen." The main tactical display switched to a system-wide view. What they saw defied every law of physics Zexton had ever learned. Space itself seemed to be folding, creating corridors of distorted reality that pulsed with impossible energies. "What is that?" he breathed. Williams glanced at something off-screen. "That would be our transportation network coming online. We call them foldways. Think of them as highways through space-time. Very efficient for moving large numbers of ships very quickly across very long distances." "That's impossible. The energy requirements alone would drain a star." "Only if you're thinking about it wrong," a new voice said. Another human had stepped into view behind Williams, a young woman with short dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold too much knowledge. "When you understand that space-time is just another material to be shaped, it becomes much simpler." Zexton stared at her. She couldn't have been older than 30 human years, yet she spoke of manipulating the fundamental forces of reality as if discussing the weather. "Admiral," Williams said, drawing his attention back, "I want to be very clear about something. We know about every ship in your fleet. We know about the Council's military reserves. We know about your secret research facilities and your hidden weapons. We know about the psychic warriors you think are your ultimate trump card." The human's gentle smile never wavered. "We know everything because we've been inside your networks since before you knew we existed. We've been preparing for this moment for a very long time." "Preparing how?" Zexton's voice was barely above a whisper. Williams stood up from his desk. Behind him, through the window, the city skyline was changing. Buildings were rising from the ground, their surfaces gleaming with technologies Zexton couldn't identify. Ships were appearing in the sky, not launching, simply materializing as if they had always been there. "We've been preparing by becoming something you can't defeat," Williams said. Something you can't understand. Something that makes your worst nightmares look like pleasant dreams. The communications officer suddenly straightened. Sir, I'm receiving reports from across the fleet. Every ship is detecting the same anomalies. The humans, they're appearing on our vessels. What do you mean appearing? They're just there, inside our ships, past all our security, past our shields, past our scanning systems. They're not threatening anyone, just observing. Zex then felt something cold settle in his stomach. How many? Unknown, sir. They seem to phase in and out of our detection range at will. But, sir, the officer's voice was shaking. One of them is standing right behind you. Zex then spun around. There, in the middle of his bridge, stood a human male. He was tall, with dark skin and calm eyes, wearing simple black clothing that seemed to absorb light. He smiled politely at the admiral. Hello, the human said. Don't mind me. I'm just here to observe. Every weapon on the bridge turned toward the intruder. Energy rifles, plasma pistols, even the bridge's automated defense systems, all locked onto the human. Fire, Zexton commanded. The bridge erupted in weapon discharge. Energy beams, plasma bolts, and projectile rounds all converged on the spot where the human stood. When the light and smoke cleared, the human was still there, completely unharmed. He brushed a bit of dust off his sleeve and looked mildly disappointed. Really, he said, that's the best you can do? I was expecting at least some exotic matter weapons, or maybe a dimensional disruptor. This is just primitive. Zexton's voice was a hoarse whisper. What are you? The human considered the question seriously. I'm what happens when you push a species too far, then give them time to get creative. My name is Marcus, by the way. I specialize in personal defense systems. On the main screen, Williams was watching the bridge with obvious amusement. Admiral, I think you're beginning to understand your situation. This is impossible, Zexton said. No species can develop this kind of technology this quickly. You were barely spacefaring when we first detected you. Oh, we've been spacefaring much longer than you think, Williams replied. We got very good at hiding. See, when we first detected the Council, we realized something important. You don't conquer species because you're strong. You conquer them because they don't know how to hide. Marcus, still standing calmly in the middle of the bridge, nodded. So we learned. We became very, very good at hiding. And while we were hidden, we watched. We learned. We prepared. For what? Zexton demanded. William's smile finally faded. For the day when we stopped hiding and started hunting. The tactical display suddenly lit up with new contacts. Hundreds of them. Ships that appeared to be materializing from nothing, surrounding the Council fleet. But these weren't like any ships Zexton had ever seen. They seemed to bend light around them, their hulls shifting and flowing like living metal. Admiral, his tactical officer reported, voice cracking with stress. I'm reading impossible energy signatures from the human vessels. Power outputs that should require entire star systems to generate. Ow! Zexton breathed. We learned a long time ago that matter and energy are just different states of the same thing, Marcus explained conversationally. Once you really understand that, once you can manipulate the quantum foam directly, power generation becomes trivial. Williams leaned forward on the screen. Admiral, I'm going to give you a choice. One chance to do the right thing. What choice? Turn your ships around. Return to Council space. Dissolve your empire. Free every slave, every experimental subject, every world you've conquered. Become a force for healing instead of destruction. Zexton's laugh was harsh and bitter. You think threats will work on the Council? We have fleets that could sterilize galaxies. We have weapons that can unmake matter at the subatomic level. We have psychic warriors who can tear minds apart from light years away. I know, Williams said sadly. And that's exactly why we can't let you leave. The human ships moved, not with the gradual acceleration of normal space vessels, but with instant, impossible speed. They were simply in new positions, as if space itself had rearranged to accommodate them. Sir, the navigation officer called out, we're being held in place by some kind of gravitational field. Engines are at maximum power, but we're not moving. All ships, Emergency jump to hyperspace, Zexton ordered. Jump drives are non-responsive, sir. Something is interfering with our space-time manipulation. Marcus tilted his head apologetically. Sorry about that. We've established a local reality anchor. Think of it as temporal quicksand. The more you struggle, the more stuck you become. Zexton turned to the screen, where Williams was watching with patient eyes. What do you want? I want you to understand something, Admiral. For 3,000 years, your council has been the monster in the dark. You've been the thing that parents tell their children about in cautionary tales. You've been death and slavery and the end of hope for millions of species. The Secretary General stood up, and for the first time, Zexton saw something terrifying in his kind eyes. Now, Williams said quietly, you get to learn what it's like to be afraid. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Around them, the impossible human ships waited, patient as predators watching cornered prey. Zexton looked at Marcus, who was still standing calmly in the middle of the bridge. What happens now? Marcus smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression the Admiral had ever seen. Now, he said, you get to find out why humanity is called the species that doesn't know when to quit. Supreme Counselor Vexmar had ruled the Galactic Council for 800 years. In all that time, no emergency session had ever been called with such urgency, such barely controlled panic in the voices of his subordinates. Now, as he stood in the center of the Council's most sacred chamber on their homeworld of Nexus Prime, he felt something he had not experienced in centuries: genuine fear. The holographic reports flickered around him like accusing spirits. The Terran incident, they were calling it, though incident seemed woefully inadequate for what had occurred. Admiral Zexton's entire battle fleet, 300 ships representing the finest military technology in the galaxy, had simply vanished. Not destroyed, not defeated in battle. Vanished. Show me the recordings again, Vexmar commanded, his voice echoing off the crystalline walls of the chamber. The central projector activated, displaying the final transmission from the Eternal Dominion. Vexmar watched again as his most experienced admiral, a warrior who had conquered 12 star systems single-handedly, stammered and trembled before a species that shouldn't have posed any threat at all. The humans, Admiral Zexton's voice came through clearly. They're not what our intelligence suggested. The transmission cut to static, then nothing. That had been 18 standard hours ago. Since then, every attempt to contact the fleet had failed. Long-range sensors showed empty space where 300 warships should have been. Counselor, the voice belonged to Intelligence Director Keelrin, a Vorthack whose multiple brains made her the most analytically capable being in Council space. We've completed our assessment of the available data, and the humans appear to have technological capabilities far in excess of our initial estimates. The energy readings we detected before contact was loss suggest power generation on a scale we previously thought impossible. Vexmar's chitinous hide rippled with agitation. Impossible? The Council possesses the most advanced technology in the galaxy. We have weapons that can crack planets. We have ships that can travel between galaxies. We have psychic warriors who can— Counselor, Keelrin interrupted gently. May I show you something? A new hologram appeared, showing a detailed analysis of the energy signatures detected during the final moments of contact with Zexton's fleet. This is the power output we recorded from a single human vessel, Keelrin explained. Notice the exotic matter resonance patterns. They're using controlled quantum foam manipulation on a macro scale. Vexmar stared at the display. That's theoretically impossible. The energy requirements would drain a star. Unless— another voice said from across the chamber, they've found a way to tap directly into the quantum vacuum itself. All eyes turned to the speaker, Science Coordinator Thexnil, whose species had discovered the principles of faster-than-light travel that the Council used. If anyone would understand the implications, it would be him. Explain, Vexmar demanded. Thexnil moved to the center of the chamber, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into prismatic patterns. For millennia, we've been using technology that works with the laws of physics. These humans appear to have found ways to rewrite those laws locally. They're not just advanced, they're operating on fundamentals that we didn't know existed. That still doesn't explain how they defeated our entire fleet without firing a shot. Perhaps, a new voice said from the chamber's entrance, "I can help with that." Every being in the chamber spun toward the voice. Standing in the doorway, apparently having bypassed every security system, scanner, and guard in the most protected facility in council space, was a human female. She was smaller than most species represented in the council, with auburn hair and green eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the chamber at once. She wore simple gray clothing and carried no visible weapons. Yet every instinct Vexmar possessed screamed that she was the most dangerous thing he had ever encountered. "Impossible," he breathed. "No one can enter this chamber without authorization. The security systems are quite good," the human agreed, walking calmly into the center of the chamber as if she belonged there. Very impressive energy barriers, quantum locks, even some rather creative temporal distortions. Whoever designed them clearly understood security. She paused, looking around at the assembled council members with what might have been mild amusement. "Of course," she continued, "they were designed to keep out people who follow the same physical laws you do." Intelligence Director Keelrin was the first to react, her multiple brains processing the threat faster than the others. "Security alert. Intruder in the—" She stopped mid-sentence as she realized her communication implant wasn't working. In fact, none of their technology was working. The lights in the chamber continued to function, but every personal device, every weapon, every emergency system had simply stopped responding. "Ow!" Vexmar asked. "Your technology depends on controlled electromagnetic fields and quantum state manipulations," the human explained patiently. "We've established a local null field that prevents any hostile technology from functioning. Think of it as a very selective electromagnetic pulse that only affects things we don't want working." Science Coordinator Thexnil's crystalline form pulsed with agitation. The computational power required for that level of selective interference would require the processing capacity of approximately 47 billion human brains working in parallel, the woman finished. "Yes, we know. Fortunately, we have access to that." The chamber fell silent. "My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez," the human continued. "I represent the Soul Defense Collective, and I'm here to discuss your recent attempt to invade our territory." Vexmar found his voice. "What have you done with our fleet?" Dr. Vasquez tilted her head, as if considering how to explain something complex to a child. "Your fleet is currently in a stable temporal loop approximately 3 light seconds outside your solar system. They're experiencing time at roughly 1/10,000th normal speed, which gives us plenty of time to decide what to do with them." "Temporal manipulation on that scale is impossible," Thexnil protested. "For you, yes," Dr. Vasquez agreed. "Your species thinks of time as a river that flows in one direction. We learned to think of it as an ocean that can be navigated in any direction we choose." Intelligence Director Keelrin stepped forward, her analytical minds working frantically. "What do you want?" "That's an excellent question," Dr. Vasquez replied. "What we want is for you to understand your situation. For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council has conquered, enslaved, and destroyed species across the galaxy. You've convinced yourselves that this is natural order, that the strong rule the weak, and that resistance is futile." She walked slowly around the chamber, looking at each council member in turn. "What you've never encountered," she continued, "is a species that refused to accept that natural order. A species that decided to become strong enough to change the rules entirely." Vexmar's voice was hollow. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that the age of the Galactic Council is over." Dr. Vasquez gestured, and the chamber's main display activated without any input from the council systems. The image that appeared showed space around Nexus Prime, the council's homeworld, the most protected planet in their territory. Surrounding the planet were ships. Thousands of them. Human ships that seemed to bend light around their hulls, making them appear as shifting shadows against the stars. "Ow!" Vexmar whispered. "Our sensors show nothing." Our orbital defense platforms haven't detected any intrusion. Your sensors are looking for ships that follow the same rules yours do, Dr. Vasquez explained. We phase-shifted our fleet into a parallel dimensional space. We're here, but we're also not here. It's quite useful for bypassing defenses. Science Coordinator Fexnil's form was pulsing rapidly now, a sign of extreme agitation in his species. The energy expenditure for dimensional phase shifting on that scale would require the entire energy output of your sun for approximately 6 months. Yes, Dr. Vasquez finished. We completed the calculation before we started. Fortunately, we've learned to be very efficient with our power usage. Intelligence Director Keelrin spoke up, her voice tight with controlled panic. How long have you been preparing for this? Dr. Vasquez smiled, and it was not a reassuring expression. Director, do you know when the Council first detected humanity? Standard year 2387. Your species had just achieved faster-than-light capability. That's when we let you detect us, Dr. Vasquez corrected. We'd actually been observing you for over 2 centuries by that point. We knew what you were, what you did to species that caught your attention. So we prepared. She gestured again, and the display changed to show a timeline spanning several centuries. The Council members watched in growing horror as the scope of human preparation became clear. We didn't just develop better weapons or faster ships, Dr. Vasquez explained. We developed better humans. Enhanced intelligence, improved physical capabilities, extended lifespans, and, most importantly, the ability to work together on a scale your species can't comprehend. Enhanced how? Keelrin asked. Genetic optimization, cybernetic integration, consciousness networking, quantum cognition enhancement. We turned ourselves into the weapon we needed to defeat you. Vexmar felt his ancient hearts beating too fast. What do you intend to do with us? Dr. Vasquez considered the question seriously. That depends entirely on you, Counselor. We could simply eliminate the Council and all its military forces. It would take us approximately 6 standard hours to neutralize every threat you represent. She paused, letting that sink in. Or she continued, you could choose to cooperate with a new order. What new order? The order where conquest and slavery are no longer acceptable, where species are free to develop according to their own natures, where the strong protect the weak instead of preying upon them. Fexnil pulsed with what might have been indignation. You cannot simply rewrite the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. Can't we? Dr. Vasquez asked. Watch. The display changed again, showing real-time images from across Council space. On world after world, human ships were appearing over major population centers. But they weren't attacking. Instead, they were broadcasting messages in every known language. One of the broadcasts played in the chamber, Citizens of the Galaxy, you are free. The Galactic Council's authority is now ended. You may choose your own governments, develop your own cultures, and live your own lives. Any attempt by Council forces to maintain control will be prevented. This is not a conquest. This is liberation. Vexmar stared at the displays, showing his empire crumbling in real time. This is madness. Without the Council's authority, there will be chaos. Anarchy. Perhaps, Dr. Vasquez agreed. Freedom often leads to conflict before it leads to peace. But at least it will be their conflicts, their choices, their futures, not yours. And if we refuse to cooperate? Intelligence Director Keelrin asked. Dr. Vasquez's expression became very serious. Director, how many species has the Council wiped out completely? Keelrin's multiple brains worked for a moment. The official records show 47 species rendered extinct during Council expansion. The actual number is 137, Dr. Vasquez corrected. We've done a very thorough audit of your activities. Entire civilizations erased because they refused to submit. Billions of sentient beings murdered for the crime of wanting to remain free. The humans' green eyes seem to burn with cold fire. If you refuse to cooperate, if you attempt to maintain your empire through force, then you will discover exactly what those 137 species faced. The difference is when we do it, we'll make sure no trace of your civilization survives anywhere in the galaxy. The chamber was completely silent except for the soft hum of life support systems. However, Dr. Vasquez continued, her tone becoming gentler. If you choose to help us build something better, if you use your knowledge and resources to heal the damage your empire has caused, then you'll find us capable of forgiveness. We don't want to be conquerors. We want to be liberators. Vexmar looked around at his fellow council members, seeing his own fear and uncertainty reflected in their faces. What exactly are you proposing? Full cooperation with the dissolution of your empire. Complete records of all council activities, including the locations of secret facilities and hidden assets. Assistance in transitioning your member worlds to self-governance. And personal testimony regarding your crimes against sentient life. And in exchange, you get to live. You get to see the galaxy become something better than it was. And someday, if you prove yourselves capable of change, you might even be forgiven. Science Coordinator Fexnil's form had stopped pulsing, settling into the dull glow that indicated deep thought in his species. How do we know you won't simply eliminate us once we've served your purposes? Dr. Vasquez smiled sadly. Coordinator, if we wanted you dead, you'd already be dead. We had the capability to sterilize every council world simultaneously before we ever revealed ourselves. The fact that you're still breathing means we've chosen mercy. She gestured one final time, and the display showed images of human medical teams already working on former council worlds, treating diseases that the council had allowed to spread, feeding populations that the council had kept deliberately malnourished, and rebuilding infrastructure that the council had deliberately kept primitive to maintain control. We didn't become stronger than you, so we could rule like you, Dr. Vasquez said. We became stronger, so no one would ever have to rule like you again. Vexmar stared at the images of human aid workers risking their lives to help beings they'd never met, on worlds they'd never seen, for no reason other than it was the right thing to do. It was a concept so alien to council thinking that his mind struggled to process it. Why? He asked finally. Why do you care what happens to species you've never encountered? Dr. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. Because, Counselor, we remember what it was like to be afraid that monsters might come in the night. We remember what it was like to look at the stars and wonder if something terrible was watching us from the darkness. She looked directly at him, and in her eyes he saw something that made his ancient soul tremble. We remember what it was like to be powerless, she said quietly, and we decided that no one should ever have to feel that way again. The chamber fell silent as the implications of her words settled over the council members. You have 24 standard hours to decide, Dr. Vasquez said, walking toward the chamber's exit. Cooperate and help us build something better. Resist and learn why every nightmare your victims ever had about you is nothing compared to what we're capable of. She paused at the doorway and looked back. Oh, and Counselor, don't bother trying to contact your emergency fleets or activate your doomsday weapons. We've been inside your networks for decades. Every system you think is under your control is actually under ours. As she disappeared through the doorway, the chamber's systems came back online. Immediately, alerts began flooding in from across council space. Emergency fleets were reporting system failures. Doomsday weapons weren't responding to activation codes. Secret facilities were finding their doors sealed and their staff trapped inside, unharmed but completely isolated. Vexmar slumped into his ceremonial chair, feeling every one of his 800 years. Around him, the greatest empire in galactic history was crumbling not from external attack, but from the simple realization that they had never been as strong as they thought. They had built their power on the assumption that no one would ever be strong enough to challenge them. They had been wrong. Now, as reports continued to stream in of human forces securing council territories with impossible speed and efficiency, Vexmar began to understand the true scope of their mistake. They hadn't just underestimated humanity's technology. They had underestimated humanity itself, a species that had spent centuries preparing not just to survive, but to ensure that no one else would ever have to live in fear the way they had. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Galactic Council faced a choice: evolve or die. The clock was ticking. The war room beneath the Council's primary military complex had been designed to coordinate campaigns across multiple galaxies. Its quantum-encrypted communication systems could reach any point in Council space instantaneously. Its strategic computers could process battle scenarios involving millions of ships across thousands of star systems. Its defensive systems could withstand direct planetary bombardment. None of it mattered now. General Kekstar of the Council's elite Psi Corps stood before the massive tactical display, watching in real time as his empire collapsed. Red indicators flickered across the holographic map like a spreading plague, each one representing another system falling under human control. But these weren't military defeats. They were something far worse. They were defections. "Sir," his aide, a young Kelrani officer, spoke hesitantly. "We're receiving another surrender transmission, this time from the 7th Fleet." Kekstar's forearms clenched into fists. The 7th Fleet consisted of 200 ships crewed by the most fanatically loyal soldiers in the Council military. They had fought the Vrex Rebellion without losing a single vessel. They had held the line at the Siege of Altair for 3 years against overwhelming odds. They didn't surrender. "Show me," he commanded. The central display switched to show Fleet Admiral Thexkor, a massive Brittarian whose species was bred for war. The Admiral's thick hide was marked with ritual scars representing dozens of victories, and his 6 eyes held the cold intelligence that made him one of the Council's finest tactical minds. But now those eyes held something Kekstar had never seen in them before. Shame. "General," Admiral Thexkor rumbled, his voice heavy with defeat, "I am transmitting the formal surrender of the 7th Fleet to human forces." "Explain yourself," Admiral Kekstar snarled. "What possible force could make you?" "They showed us the truth, General," Thexkor interrupted. "They showed us everything." The Admiral's image was replaced by documentary footage that made Kekstar's blood run cold. Video records from Council facilities, detailed documentation of experiments, recordings of meetings where Council leaders casually discussed genocide as if it were a budget item. But worse than the content was the source. These weren't human fabrications or propaganda. These were the Council's own records, pulled from the most secure databases in their empire. Files that should have been impossible to access, displayed with perfect clarity for all to see. "They know everything, General," Admiral Thexkor's voice continued over the horrific images. "Every atrocity, every cover-up, every lie we told ourselves about the greater good. And they're broadcasting it to everyone." Kekstar's mind raced. The psychological warfare implications were staggering. For 3 millennia, the Council had maintained control through carefully managed information. Most of their own forces believed they were bringing order and civilization to primitive species. Most Council citizens thought their empire was a force for peace and prosperity. Now, the humans were showing them the truth. "Sir," another aide called out, "we're receiving mass communication from across the fleet. Crew members are demanding explanations. Some ships are reporting mutinies." The tactical display updated again, showing the positions of Council forces throughout local space. What Kekstar saw made his stomach twist. Nearly a third of his ships were showing yellow indicators, crews in open revolt. Another third showed blue, forces that had already declared for the human side. Only the final third remained green, still loyal to the Council. And even those were flickering as he watched. "Ow," he whispered. "How are they doing this?" Because a new voice said from behind him, "Your people have consciences." Every being in the war room spun toward the voice. Standing near the chamber's main entrance, apparently having appeared from nowhere, was a human male. He was tall and lean, with dark skin and silver hair, wearing what appeared to be a simple uniform of deep blue fabric. But it was his eyes that made Kekstar step backward. They were ancient eyes, holding the weight of experiences that no mortal being should possess. Impossible que brevet. This facility is buried 3 kilometers underground. The access tunnels are sealed. The defenses are quite impressive, the human agreed, walking calmly into the center of the room. Quantum barriers, temporal locks, psionic shields. Very thorough work. He paused, studying the tactical displays with obvious interest. Of course, he continued, they were designed by beings who think in 3 dimensions. We found it much easier to simply step around them. As he spoke, more humans began appearing throughout the chamber. Not walking in, not materializing from transport beams, simply stepping into existence as if they had always been there. Within moments, there were dozens of them, each one calm and unthreatening, yet radiating a presence that made every weapon in the room feel inadequate. I am Admiral Chen Wei, the first human said, of the Soul Liberation Fleet, and I'm here to accept your surrender. Kextar's primary arms reached for his plasma rifle, a weapon capable of vaporizing a vehicle with a single shot. His fingers closed around the grip, and he began to draw. The weapon was gone. Not vaporized, not broken, simply gone. He looked down at his hands, then around the room. Every weapon, from personal sidearms to the chamber's automated defense turrets, had vanished. Where? He began. Displace them about 6 inches to the left in the 5th dimension, Admiral Chun explained helpfully. They're perfectly safe, just temporarily inaccessible. We found it's much easier to have conversations when people aren't distracted by the urge to shoot at us. One of Kextar's officers, a young Drakari lieutenant, stepped forward. Sir, with respect, we should consider what? Kextar rotted. Surrendering to these aliens? Admiral Chun raised an eyebrow. General, do you know what irony is? Before Kextar could respond, the chamber's displays changed. Instead of tactical readouts, they now showed feeds from across Council space. On world after world, the same scene was playing out. Human ships arriving in orbit, broadcasting messages of liberation, and watching as planetary populations rose up against their Council overseers. But these weren't military conquests. They were revolutions, sparked by the simple revelation of truth. For 3,000 years, Admiral Chen said, his voice carrying easily through the large chamber, you've maintained control through lies. You convinced your own people that conquest was civilization. You convinced your soldiers that slavery was order. You convinced entire populations that resistance was futile. The displays showed human medical teams treating former Council slaves, human engineers helping rebuild worlds that had been strip-mined for resources, human teachers helping liberate populations learn to read their own languages again. But the truth, Chen continued, is that your empire was built on fear, maintained through ignorance, and powered by the suffering of those too weak to fight back. Kextar found his voice. And you think you're different? You think you're better than us? Admiral Chun was quiet for a long moment. General, may I tell you a story? I don't. 250 years ago, Chun continued as if Kextar hadn't spoken, my great-great-grandfather was a soldier. He fought in what we call the Last War, the final conflict between human nations before we learned to work together. The displays changed again, showing images of Earth's history. Burning cities, massive armies clashing across devastated landscapes, weapons of unimaginable destruction reducing entire regions to radioactive wasteland. He watched his friends die for causes they didn't understand, ordered by leaders who saw them as expendable resources. He saw cities full of innocent people turn to glass because someone in power decided their deaths would serve the greater good. Kextar watched the images with growing unease. The destruction shown was on a scale that rivaled some of the Council's own campaigns. When it was over, Chun continued, when the last bombs had fallen and the last armies had surrendered, he came home to a world that had to choose what to become next. And he made a decision that shaped everything that followed. What decision? That no human would ever again have to live in fear of their own leaders. That no human would ever again be sacrificed for someone else's vision of the greater good. That no human would ever again be told that their suffering was necessary for the peace of others. Chun gestured, and the displays now showed Earth as it was today. gleaming cities that seemed to grow from living crystal, vast parks where children of a dozen enhanced human subspecies played together, orbital habitats that housed billions in comfort and safety. We didn't just decide to change our world, General. We decided to change ourselves. To become the species we needed to be to ensure that what we had suffered would never happen again. To anyone, added another human, a woman with short red hair and brilliant green eyes. Not just to humans. To anyone. Kekstar stared at her. Who are you? Dr. Sarah Chun, she replied. I'm Admiral Chin's great-granddaughter. I'm also the commander of the Liberation Fleet's Psychological Warfare Division. She gestured toward the displays, showing Council forces surrendering across the galaxy. This isn't military conquest, General. This is revelation. We're showing your people what they've really been fighting for, what their leaders have really been doing in their names. Lies, Kekstar said, but his voice lacked conviction. Truth, Dr. Chun corrected. Your own records, your own files, your own secret communications. We're not telling them what to think, General. We're showing them what is, and letting them decide for themselves. Another aide approached Kekstar hesitantly. Sir, we're receiving communications from the Nexus Defense Grid. They're requesting permission to surrender to human forces. Kekstar's world reeled. The Nexus Defense Grid was the most powerful military installation in Council space, protected by weapons that could destroy entire fleets. If they were surrendering, Sir, the aide continued, they say the humans have offered to help them transition the defensive systems to planetary protection instead of population control. Admiral Chen nodded. We have no interest in destroying your military capabilities, General. We want to help you redirect them toward protecting people instead of oppressing them. This is madness, Kekstar said. You can't just restructure galactic civilization. Can't we? Dr. Chen asked. General, in the past 72 hours, we've liberated 47 star systems, freed over 6 billion sentient beings from slavery, and convinced 80% of your own forces to join us voluntarily. She paused, studying his face. We're not trying to conquer your empire, General. We're trying to heal it. The tactical display updated again, and Kekstar saw something that made his heart stop. The indicator for his own command ship, the massive dreadnought that served as his mobile headquarters, had changed from green to blue. Your crew made their choice an hour ago, Admiral Chun said gently. They voted unanimously to join the liberation. Impossible. My crew is fanatically loyal. Your crew, Dr. Chen corrected, consists of intelligent beings who joined the military to protect people. When they learned what the Council actually does, they decided to protect people from the Council instead. Kekstar slumped into his command chair. Around him, his staff was looking at the humans with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hope. The revolution wasn't being imposed from outside. It was growing from within. What do you want from me? He asked quietly. Admiral Chen's expression softened. We want you to help us, General. You know the Council's military systems better than anyone. You know where the black sites are hidden, where the illegal weapons are stored, where the experimental subjects are being held. And if I refuse, then you'll be isolated here while the galaxy heals around you, Dr. Chen replied. Your war is already over, General. Your empire has already fallen. The only question now is whether you want to help build something better in its place. Kekstar looked around the chamber at his officers, seeing the same questions in their faces that were tearing at his own mind. Everything he had believed, everything he had fought for, everything he had sacrificed for, it was all built on lies. The experiments, he said finally, the ones on Gamma Station, the children you're using for psionic testing. Are you really going to stop them? Admiral Chen's eyes grew cold. General, those experiments ended 6 hours ago. Our medical teams are treating the survivors as we speak. The display showed feeds from a space station that Kekstar recognized, Gamma Station, one of the Council's most secret research facilities. But instead of the sterile laboratories and containment cells he remembered, he saw something that made his soul ache. Human doctors carefully treating small alien children, some of whom could barely walk, all of whom looked at their rescuers with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. How many? Kekstar u espered. 437 survivors, Dr. Chen replied, her voice tight with controlled anger. They were testing the effects of pain on developing psychic abilities. Some of these children haven't been outside a laboratory in their entire lives. Kextar watched as a human medic knelt beside a young Altarian girl, no more than 6 years old by her species development, who was cowering in the corner of what had once been a test chamber. The medic spoke softly, offering her a small toy, a stuffed animal of some kind, and waiting patiently as the child slowly, carefully, reached out to touch it. When the child smiled for the first time in what might have been her entire life, Kextar felt something break inside his chest. I didn't know, he said, his voice barely audible. Yes, you did, Admiral Chen replied, but his tone was gentle, not accusatory. Part of you knew, General. Part of all of you knew. But you convinced yourselves it was necessary. You told yourselves it served the greater good. You found ways to make the unthinkable become routine. Kextar looked up at him. How do you stop that? How do you prevent that kind of corruption? By never forgetting that the moment you start thinking of others as acceptable losses, Dr. Chen said, you've already lost what makes you worth saving. The general sat in silence for a long moment, watching the feeds of human rescue teams working throughout what had been his empire. They moved with efficiency, but also with compassion. They were soldiers, but they were also healers. They had the power to destroy, but they were choosing to rebuild. What happens to us, he asked finally, to the council leadership, to the military commanders, to those of us who knew? Admiral Chun exchanged a look with Dr. Chun. That depends on you, General. There will be accounting for what was done. There will be justice for the victims. But there will also be mercy for those willing to help heal the damage they caused. And if we refuse, then you'll face the justice you've been avoiding for 3,000 years, Dr. Chen said simply. But we'd rather have you as partners in building something better than as prisoners paying for something terrible. Kextar looked around the chamber one more time, seeing his officers, his staff, his fellow warriors. In their faces, he saw the same realization that was crushing his own spirit. They had been living a lie so comprehensive that it had become their reality. But in the faces of the humans around him, he saw something else, the possibility of redemption. What do you need from me? He asked. Admiral Chen smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare had begun, Kextar felt something that might have been hope. Help us find the rest of the children, General, Chen said. Help us find everyone who's been hurt by this system. Help us make sure it never happens again. Kextar stood up from his command chair and, for the first time in his military career, removed his rank insignia. The gesture felt like shedding chains he hadn't realized he was wearing. Where do we start? He asked. The war was over. The healing could begin. 1 year after the liberation, former Supreme Counselor Vexmar stood in what had once been the Council's most sacred chamber and tried to comprehend how much the galaxy had changed. The crystalline walls that had once echoed with pronouncements of conquest now housed the Galactic Rehabilitation Tribunal, with a slow work of healing 3 millennia of damage continued each day. He was no longer the ruler of the galaxy's greatest empire. He was Witness Vexmar now, one of several hundred former council officials who had chosen cooperation over imprisonment. His role was simple: tell the truth about what the council had done, help locate victims and hidden facilities, and assist in the transition to what humanity called consensual governance. The work was harder than he had ever imagined. Witness Vexmar. The soft voice belonged to Dr. Elena Vasquez, the human who had first appeared in this very chamber to announce the end of his empire. She approached with a data tablet in her hands, and that same patient expression she always wore. We've received responses from the Altarian Rehabilitation Committee regarding your testimony about the mining operations. Vexmar accepted the tablet with hands that still trembled slightly when he thought about what those mining operations had actually entailed. The official council records had called it resource extraction. The reality had been strip mining entire continents while the native population was forced to watch their world die around them. They want to thank you, Dr. Vasquez continued. Your information about the hidden excavation sites helped them locate 17 mass graves. The families finally have answers about what happened to their missing relatives. Vexmar read the message on the tablet. It was written in careful galactic standard by someone whose native language had been nearly destroyed by council education policies. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made his ancient hearts ache. "We know you were part of the machine that hurt us," the message read. "But because you chose to help us heal, we choose to forgive. Thank you for helping us find our lost ones. They can rest now, and so can we." "I don't deserve their forgiveness," Vexmar said quietly. Dr. Vasquez studied his face with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see everything. "Witness, may I ask you something?" He nodded. "Do you think forgiveness is about what people deserve?" Vexmar considered the question. "Isn't it?" "No," Dr. Vasquez said gently. "Forgiveness is about what people choose. The Altarians aren't forgiving you because you've earned it. They're forgiving you because they've decided that healing is more important than punishment." She gestured toward the tablet. "But that doesn't mean the work is finished. There are still missing persons cases to solve, still hidden facilities to locate, still victims who need help. Your forgiveness comes with responsibility." Through the chamber's great windows, Vexmar could see the transformed skyline of Nexus Prime. Where once the city had been a monument to council power, with towering spires dedicated to military might and administrative control, now it bustled with the architecture of collaboration. Buildings that housed refugee assistance centers, medical facilities for torture survivors, schools where children from dozens of species learned together. And everywhere, the impossible sight of humans working alongside former enemies, as if it were the most natural thing in the galaxy. "Dr. Vasquez," Vexmar said, "may I ask you something?" "Of course. How do you do it? How do your people work so closely with those of us who did such terrible things?" Dr. Vasquez was quiet for a moment, watching the activity in the streets below. "Do you know what the hardest part of this whole process has been for us?" Vexmar shook his head. "Learning to hate the system without hating the people trapped in it," she said. "Most of the council officials we've worked with aren't monsters, Witness. They're ordinary people who got caught up in something terrible and found ways to justify it to themselves." She turned to look at him directly. "The real monsters were the system itself. The structures that made atrocity seem normal, the incentives that rewarded cruelty, the culture that taught people to see others as less than themselves. And you think we can change?" "I think you already have," Dr. Vasquez replied. "The fact that you're here, doing this work, facing the truth about what happened, that's change. The question isn't whether you can change. The question is whether you can live with who you're becoming." Before Vexmar could respond, an alert chimed on Dr. Vasquez's communication device. She glanced at it, and her expression grew serious. "Excuse me, Witness. There's a situation developing that requires immediate attention." She activated a wall display, showing a feed from somewhere in deep space. Vexmar recognized the configuration immediately. It was a council military formation, but not one of the forces that had joined the liberation. This was one of the holdout fleets, groups that had refused to surrender and had been conducting guerrilla operations from hidden bases. "What's happening?" Vexmar asked. "Admiral Kexthal's rogue fleet has emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Terran system. Dr. Vasquez explained. "They're broadcasting on all frequencies, demanding the return of the legitimate government." Vexmar felt ice form in his stomach. Admiral Kexthal was one of the Council's most fanatical commanders, a true believer who would rather see the galaxy burned than accept the end of the Empire. His fleet might be smaller than what the Council used to field, but it was still comprised of ships capable of devastating entire worlds. "He's going to attack Earth," Vexmar said. "No," Dr. Vasquez replied calmly. "He's going to try to attack Earth. There's a significant difference." The display changed to show the approaching fleet in more detail. 50 heavy cruisers and a dozen dreadnoughts, all flying the old Council colors and broadcasting messages about restoring order to the galaxy. They moved in perfect formation, their weapons charged and ready. They also looked pathetically small against the backdrop of a human response. Emerging from what seemed like empty space, human ships began to appear around Kexthal's fleet. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. Ships of every size and configuration, from elegant cruisers that bent light around their hulls to massive vessels that seemed to be built from crystallized starlight itself. And they weren't just appearing from the direction of Earth. They were materializing from every direction at once, as if they had been waiting in dimensions that Kexthal couldn't detect. How many? Vexmar whispered. That's just the local defense fleet, Dr. Vasquez said. If Admiral Kexthal had actually posed a threat, we would have deployed additional forces. The communication channels crackled with an incoming transmission from the rogue fleet. Admiral Kexthal's scarred face appeared on screen, his reptilian features twisted with the kind of fanatical determination that had made him one of the Council's most effective commanders. I am Admiral Kexthal of the True Galactic Council, he announced. I demand the immediate surrender of the terrorist forces occupying Council space, and the restoration of legitimate authority. Dr. Vasquez sighed and activated her own communication system. Admiral Kexthal, this is Dr. Elena Vasquez of the Soul Defense Collective. You are ordered to stand down immediately and surrender your vessels for processing. Kexthal's laugh was harsh and bitter. You think your parlor tricks and propaganda will work on true warriors? We remember what the Council was before you infected it with your weakness. We will restore the natural order. Admiral, Dr. Vasquez said patiently, you are outnumbered approximately 400 to 1. Your weapons cannot penetrate our defenses. Your ships cannot escape our containment fields. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. Let them come, Kexthal snarled. We'll show the galaxy what Council steel can do against human lies. The rogue fleet opened fire, every ship unleashing its full arsenal simultaneously. Streams of plasma, antimatter torpedoes, and exotic energy weapons that could crack moons converged on the human vessels. Vexmar watched in fascination as the human ships simply absorbed the incoming fire. Not deflected it, not blocked it, absorbed it, as if the most powerful weapons in the galaxy were nothing more than gentle rain. How, he asked. Adaptive armor, Dr. Vasquez explained casually. It converts incoming energy into useful power for our systems. Admiral Kexthal's fleet just recharged our defensive grids for us. On screen, they could see the confusion spreading through the rogue fleet as their weapons proved completely ineffective. Ships that should have been vaporized continued to float serenely in space, utterly unharmed. Impossible, Kexthal roared. Nothing is immune to concentrated fire of that magnitude. Admiral, a new voice cut through the communications channel. You seem to be operating under some misconceptions. The speaker was Admiral Chenwei, the human military commander Vexmar had met during his own surrender. Chen appeared on screen from the bridge of a ship that looked like it was carved from a single piece of living crystal. First, Chen continued, you seem to think that your weapons represent the pinnacle of destructive capability. They don't. We've been watching your species destroy worlds for 3 millennia, and we've learned to build defenses accordingly. The display showed one of the human ships extending what looked like a simple metal rod toward Kexthal's flagship. There was no visible energy discharge, no dramatic weapon effect. The flagship's main weapons array simply ceased to exist. Second, Chan went on, you seem to think that military strength is about destruction. It isn't. It's about the ability to protect what matters. More human ships extended similar devices, and across the rogue fleet, weapon systems vanished. Not destroyed, simply removed from reality entirely. Third, you seem to think that we're interested in fighting you. We're not. We're interested in stopping you. Admiral Kexthal's voice was strangled with rage and confusion. What are you doing to us? We're demonstrating the difference between power and strength, Admiral, Chen replied. Power is the ability to destroy. Strength is the ability to create. Your empire was built on power. Our civilization is built on strength. The human ships moved closer to the rogue fleet, and Vexmar could see that they weren't just disarming the Council vessels. They were beginning to surround them with what looked like clouds of sparkling energy. What you're seeing, Dr. Vasquez explained to Vexmar, is a containment field designed to hold entire fleets. It will keep their ships safe while preventing them from causing any harm. You're taking them prisoner? We're giving them time to think, she corrected. Admiral Kexthal and his forces will be held in temporal suspension until they're ready to face the consequences of their actions. It might take days, it might take years. But eventually, most of them will choose to help rather than fight. On screen, Admiral Chun was still speaking to the trapped fleet. Admiral Kexthal, your war is over. You can choose to be part of the solution, or you can choose to remain part of the problem. But you will not be allowed to continue causing harm. This isn't over, Kexthal snarled. There are other fleets, other loyalists. The Council will rise again. No, Chun said simply, it won't. Because the idea that gave birth to the Council, that some beings are worth more than others, is dying. Your own crews are starting to understand that. As if to prove his point, several ships in the rogue fleet began powering down their weapons and broadcasting surrender signals. Even among Kexthal's most fanatical followers, the reality of their situation was beginning to penetrate. Dr. Vasquez turned to Vexmar. This is why your testimony is so important. Witness. Every person who chooses cooperation over resistance brings us closer to a galaxy where no one has to live in fear. Vexmar watched as the last of the rogue fleet was secured, their crews already being contacted by human negotiators who would spend however long it took to help them understand their choices. It was a level of patience and persistence that his species had never shown to anyone. Dr. Vasquez, he said quietly, what happens when it's finished? When all the hidden facilities are found, all the victims are helped, all the holdouts are convinced to surrender. What happens to people like me? She smiled, and it was an expression full of genuine warmth. You get to live in the galaxy you're helping to create. You get to see children grow up free from the fear you once represented. You get to watch species that were enslaved become partners and friends. She paused, looking out at the transformed city beyond the windows. You get to discover what you might have been, she said, if you had never been taught to see others as enemies. Vexmar followed her gaze to the bustling streets below, where beings from dozens of species worked together on projects he couldn't have imagined a year ago. Children who might have been test subjects playing with others who might have been their guards. Former slaves and former masters learning to see each other as simply people. Will it last? He asked. This peace, this cooperation, will it survive when humanity isn't there to enforce it? Dr. Vasquez laughed, a sound full of genuine amusement. Witness, who do you think is doing most of the work? We're not enforcing anything. We're just making sure no one can prevent others from choosing to be free. She gestured toward the data tablet still in his hands. Every day, more beings choose cooperation over conflict. Every day, more communities choose healing over revenge. Every day, more people discover that they're stronger together than they ever were apart. But what about the next crisis? The next threat? What happens when you encounter something even you can't handle? Dr. Vasquez was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. Then, we'll face it the same way we faced you, together, with patience, and with the absolute conviction that there is no problem that can't be solved if enough people work toward the same goal. She looked at him directly. The difference is, next time, we won't be facing it alone. We'll have partners, allies, friends who chose to stand with us not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Vexmar thought about that as he watched the city below. Former Council worlds rebuilding themselves according to their own values. Former Council military forces retrained as peacekeepers and disaster relief teams. Former Council officials like himself working to undo the damage their empire had caused. It wasn't perfect. There were still conflicts, still problems to solve, still people who chose hatred over healing. But for the first time in galactic history, those problems were being addressed through cooperation rather than conquest. Dr. Vasquez, he said finally, thank you. For what? For showing us that there was another way, he said. For proving that strength doesn't have to mean cruelty, that power doesn't have to mean oppression. Dr. Vasquez smiled. Thank you for choosing to help us prove it. As the day ended, and the lights of the transformed city began to twinkle in the gathering darkness, Vexmar made his way to his quarters. He had work to do tomorrow, more testimony to give, more victims to help locate, more former colleagues to convince that cooperation was not surrender, but salvation. It would be difficult work, emotionally draining, and often heartbreaking. But it was also the most important work he had ever done. For the first time in his 800 years of life, he was helping to build something instead of tear it down. The galaxy would never be the same, and for that, he was grateful beyond words. In the end, the Galactic Council had begged for mercy, and humanity had given them something far more valuable, the chance to earn redemption. Some chose to take it, others did not. But for the first time in 3 millennia, the choice was theirs to make. And that perhaps was the most human gift of all, the freedom to choose who to become, regardless of who you had been.